Divinity Original Sin 2 is in full swing, and one of the major issues players are having with the game is builds. What build do I use? What's a good build for a warrior, ranger, mage, etc.? Since the game is rather difficult, this has come much more into focus than one would expect. In this build guide, we're going to cover the absolutely devastating Juggernaut. Let's jump into this build and see just how it works. The Juggernaut is a warrior build that uses a mix of warfare, Geomancer, and polymorph skills to flatten its enemies to a pulp or turn them to stone. Juggernauts focus on pure strength, but deal a mix of physical and earth damage to their enemies. At first glance, this seems like a bad idea because splitting damage types generally reduces your overall DPS. However, this build takes advantage of Geomancer skills that reward players who deal physical damage, and a polymorph skill that deals earth damage but scales off strength. The purpose of this build is to deal punishing amounts of damage to the armor of various enemies, while at the same time keeping them knocked down or petrified and out of the fight. The reason why this build is so good is because it's able to focus on the damage type that best fits the situation. Juggernauts are going to focus primarily on strength, only putting points into wits and constitution as necessary. Strength will not only increase the damage of your warfare skills if you use a weapon that scales with it, but it will increase the damage of your polymorph skills as well. Because you'll be a front lines type build, it is recommended you put a few more points into constitution than your average character, but you want to use as little as possible. Wits will help give you the needed initiative to get into combat early, as well as bump your critical chance. Juggernauts will be using strength-based armor that is skewed heavily towards physical protection, which is excellent for this build. Juggernauts want to stack physical armor up as high as they possibly can, because reactive armor increases in damage in relation to your current physical armor. Reactive armor does have a very limited range, so it's not the greatest skill for this build, but it can deal wicked damage under the right circumstances. Juggernaut should utilize single-handed and shield for very good reasons. Shield using Juggernauts will not only gain access to bouncing shield, which does great AoE damage, but also deflective barrier, which increases your armor even further, as well as reflecting projectile attacks. Using a shield will also increase the effectiveness of reactive armor, and won't reduce the damage you deal with petrifying visage, since it simply scales with strength and Geomancer, not weapon damage. You'll also gain more magic armor, which you'll be very low on otherwise. All said and done, you don't have to use a shield with this build, but I would absolutely recommend it. One of the hardest parts about making a build in Divinity Original Sin 2 is getting your abilities distribution correct. It's easy to get spread too thin, and often people make the mistake of not spreading points around enough. The bonuses you gain from abilities in this game are somewhat different than the original, so it's easy to see why people can get confused. Let's take a look at what abilities and talents you need for a Juggernaut. When playing as a Juggernaut, there are almost no hard and fast rules on exactly how many points to put into abilities, but you will for sure want many points into Warfare for the increase to physical damage, and many points into Geomancer for the increase in physical armor, as well as the increase in earth damage. Just exactly what balance you choose is up to you, but you'll be doing more physical damage than earth, so I suggest favoring Warfare in a 2-to-1 or 1.5-to-1 ratio. You will also need at least 2 points into Polymorph to be able to use Medusa Head, and 3 if you wish to use Skin Graft, which I highly recommend. As far as talents go, I'd recommend the following. Opportunist. Must-have talent for every melee character because it will proc 2 or 3 times in combat easily, nearly doubling your attacks. This one should be high on the list if not first. The Pawn. This requires 1 point into Scoundrel, but it will allow you to move 1 AP worth of movement for free per turn, which is huge because positioning is key with this build and you need all of your AP to attack with. Picture of Health. This is another no-brainer talent for any build that utilizes Warfare. You can hold off on this one until you have 6+ points into Warfare though, since it won't be overly useful right away. Savage Sortilege. Worth considering with this build because of Petrifying Visage and Earthquake. It's certainly not a must-have, but you can increase your DPS if you have high crit chance. Far Out Man. This will increase the range of your Earthquake and your Petrifying Visage skills. However, they both have extremely long range as it is, so I suggest trying it out and seeing if you really need it. 2 meters is not a lot, but it may allow you to hit all targets on the screen while not being positioned perfectly. Hothead. Since you'll have so much armor, it will be very hard for enemies to damage your vitality directly. Consider taking this one if you took Savage Sortilege, as it will affect spells as well. Now that you've decided which talents and abilities you want, you'll need to identify just which skills work best for this kind of setup. Juggernauts will use a mix of Warfare and Geomancer and Polymorph skills to deal damage and stay alive. Since builds evolve over the course of the game, I'm going to put the skills in order from earliest obtainable to latest, because you won't be able to get them all right away. Warfare skills. Battering Ram. Not a skill I would normally recommend, however, this build focuses on disabling enemies and the knockdown is useful once targets' armors have been stripped. Save this for when you can get the status effect. Battle Stomp. This skill has nice synergy with this build because of the AoE knockdown with decent range. As with above, try to save this until you know you can get the status effect applied. Bouncing Shield. Deals more damage than just about any other warfare skill that doesn't use source and hits multiple targets. This skill is one of the best ways to deal physical damage with this build and is a big reason I recommend a shield. Whirlwind, a great AoE for a melee type build, and since you'll be right in the center of action, it's a natural fit here. Deflective Barrier, a great way to increase your physical armor and also reflect projectiles. Requires a shield, however it is currently bugged and can be used without one, but I don't know for how long. Use this before using reactive armor if you can. Thick of the Fight, a great way to buff your damage based on total characters around you, 10% increase per character. This skill also buffs Earthquake and Petrifying Visage. Works fantastically with AoEs, which this build is chock full of. Geomancer Skills. Fortify. Another great way to buff your physical armor while removing negative status effects. Ideally, you'd pair this with Deflective Barrier and then follow up with Reactive Armor. Can be used on a teammate as well if needed. Oily Carapace. This skill can generate a crazy amount of physical armor for 1 AP. However, there aren't too many circumstances where you can pull that off. Keep it on your bar just in case you find yourself covered in oil. Earthquake. Since knockdown is resisted by physical armor, it works here because you'll be doing a ton of physical damage with this build. Follow up a Whirlwind or Reactive Armor with this skill for best results. Reactive Armor. This skill deals damage based on your physical armor in an AoE. If you use a shield, stack up Fortify and Deflective Barrier before using this skill, it will outperform any other AoE you possess. Is also buffed by Thick of the Fight. Polymorph Skills. Tentacle Lash. One of the most powerful single target attacks in the game. Get this one early and use it near the beginning of the game when your skill selection is limited, or when an AoE would be less effective than single target damage. Chicken Claw. This skill is here because there's really no reason not to have it slotted. Good for when you really need to prevent a fearsome enemy from dealing damage. I recommend slotting this skill on almost any melee character for this reason. Medusa Head. Grants the skill Petrifying Visage, which deals earth damage in a massive AoE, only to hostile targets, and petrifies them. Scales with Strength, which is perfect. Use this against targets with weak magic armor to take them out of the fight. Skin Graft. For 2 AP and 1 SP, you can reset all of your cooldowns once per combat. So your enemies are just getting up from your Earthquake? Just pop this skill and then level them again, or re-petrify them with Petrifying Visage. Because you'll have less magic armor than physical by a good margin, it's a good idea to have someone buff you with Armor of Frost at the beginning of each fight. Or simply place 1 point into Hydrosophist and take it yourself. You can probably get 1 point from gear anyhow, so this shouldn't take any damage away from your build. Spider Legs is another great skill that you can utilize in this build, but you'd probably be best getting it early on. It might be a good idea to get it when you reach level 4 and then drop it when you get to higher levels where you have more access to skills. One great thing about it is that if you run through the web you cast, you'll gain haste, which will grant an extra AP next turn. It isn't recommended that you split attributes between intelligence and strength because then your physical damage would suffer greatly, which is the bulk of damage you will do. One of the reasons you can get away with a physical damage type and magical damage type in this build is because the primary magic damage skill, Petrifying Visage, scales with strength, making the loss in damage to the skill much less than if it scaled with intelligence, witness Earthquake. The other reason is that Geomancer in particular increases your physical armor from skills, and Reactive Armor, which is a Geomancer skill, deals physical damage. Lastly, I highly recommend you place 1 Masterwork rune into your chest armor and 1 into your shield, increasing your physical armor by a good portion if you use giant versions. This will push your Reactive Armor skill to even higher damage, making it just OP as hell. You can always remove runes later, so place whatever you've got in there now and remove it and replace it when you can. Be sure to check out our other build guides. Good luck, sorcerers. Rivlon is counting on you.